Hi everyone, this is Hector Garcia, CPA and Advanced QuickBooks Pro Advisor. And this is part 2 on how to get started with QuickBooks Online. Now the first video, that's a 2-hour video, will be linked in the description below that kind of walks you through the entire process of setting up QuickBooks Online. But that video skips the portion of online banking, downloading transactions from the bank. So this video will focus around that specifically. But first, we're going to let Google play an ad so we can pay the bills. All right, so if you already have a QuickBooks Online account set up, I want you to skip to the minutes and seconds below so you can skip the whole new account creation process. But either way, assuming that you're starting from this video, we're going to go ahead and create an account. If you already have an account, again, skip to the minutes and seconds below so you can skip the new account creation process. Now, for the folks that want to create a new account, my recommendation is that we go to www.quickbooks50.com. quickbooks50.com. quickbooks50.com will forward you to a special page that gives you 50% off your QuickBooks Online subscription. Now, if you're just doing a free trial, you're not required to enter a credit card, so you will have a 30-day free trial account anyway, but go ahead and get it set up. Now, I recommend most of my clients to go with the Plus version because it has the most amount of features. But if you want to get started, QuickBooks Online Essentials will do. So we're going to go ahead and click on where it says start free trial for QuickBooks Online Essentials. And we're going to follow the prompt to creating a new account and click create account. Now the new account creation process will take roughly about 2 minutes. You enter your company name, how long you've been in business for, click next, click all set, and you're good to go. It's that easy to set up a new account. Doesn't require a credit card until the 30 days free trial end. All right, so we got our QuickBooks Online account up and running. We're gonna go ahead and click on the gear button on the top right of the screen. We're gonna click on chart of accounts, and we're gonna make sure that we have our bank accounts and credit cards set up. So I'm gonna click here where it says see chart of accounts. If my bank account is not here already, we're going to click new on the top right of the screen, and then we're going to click on bank. Then we're going to select checking or savings, whatever it is, and we'll call this one Chase 1234. I usually recommend using the last 4 digits of the bank account to identify them. So we'll go ahead and click on save and close, and we're all set. Our bank account is created. Now I'm also going to download a credit card account. So I'm going to click on new, and then I'm going to select category type credit card, and I'll create my Chase Visa, and then click save and close. And now we got both our bank accounts and our credit cards set up. So now how do we connect them to our online banking so that transactions can download automatically? So we're going to click on the banking menu on the right of the screen. Then we're going to click on connect. Then we're going to select our bank. Click on your bank. Put the user ID and password of your bank. Then QuickBooks will start connecting with your bank. It will ask you which of the bank accounts you want to choose to connect to the bank, and every single bank account that you have in your online banking profile will show up as a downloadable account. Now, you don't have to connect every single one of the accounts. It really depends on which account belongs to this specific business that you're working with. So I'm going to go ahead and select my bank account connected to the account that I just created. And then I'm going to go down to my credit card account and connect that one with the credit card account I just created. Then I'll click on continue or connect. Perfect. And once the bank is connected, you're going to notice one really important thing. In my Chase 123 account, the one that I just downloaded, it downloaded every transaction up to yesterday. Okay, I'm recording this on January 20th, 2018. So I downloaded everything up to yesterday. And then I scroll all the way down to the bottom. And the very last transaction, I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And the very last transaction was October 23rd. So that's because QuickBooks Online will only bring the last 90 days worth of transactions. That is our current limitation, and that's it. There's nothing you can do about it. The direct connection will only bring 90 days worth of transactions. Now, Some banks allow you to manually download a specifically date range of transactions, but you have to go through their bank account directly. Chase, for example, which is the bank account that I use, has a button here on the right side that says download account activity. You click on that and then you select the bank account that you want to download from. You select the type. It needs to be this one called QuickBooks Web Connect QBO. And then under activity, you have to choose the date range. And you would pick, for example, let's say I want to do all of 2017, 01, 01, 2017, and then 10, 20, let's see, what was the last one? It was the 23rd. So I want to download up to the 22nd, 2017. Now that's assuming that your bank actually allows you to pick a date range like that. There are some banks that only allow you to download 1 month at a time instead of picking an actual date range. So if you were going to download a month at a time, you would have to go into QuickBooks and delete all the transactions for October, right? So for example, the way you would do that is you would come down here and select all the October transactions. You can click on all of them. It shouldn't be that many. You can also shift click if you want to select a whole range. You would shift click a whole range and then click on exclude selected. So if you were to do that, exclude selected, you can then download the whole month of October as a whole. That's, again, only if your bank only allows you to bring complete months at a time on the manual download. Now in Chase, which is the bank that I use, I can actually pick a date range. So that's actually the very best possible scenario. So because I have that, then I'm picking that specific date based on the last transaction that downloaded from the 90-day range. And I was able to do that. But otherwise, you would have to just cut off a whole month and then manually download each month at a time. And then I'll just click download. And then once the download is complete, I'm going to click on next to the update button. I'm going to click on file upload. Then I'm going to click on browse. I'm going to select the file that I just downloaded from the bank. Click on open. Click on next. Then select the bank account that I want to attach those transactions to. Click on next. Perfect. Once it's done, we click let's go. And we should now have all the transactions that we want. In this case, I got 1,200 transactions in there. If I scroll down, I should see transactions already for the entire date range. So once I click on next, I should see all my transactions in here. Everything, I'm going to click on last. I should see everything from the beginning of the year. Now, let me make a really important statement. If in fact you wanted to bring in all those transactions, you would follow that exercise that I just did. If you don't care about not having just having the 90-day transactions that you don't need anymore, you don't need to do the last step. You can just connect the bank, bring those 90 days, and that's it. So that's a really, really important point. But while we're at it, there's another really important point I want to make. Here where it says go to register, we're going to click on that before we add any new transactions. And you're going to notice that QuickBooks created a new transaction with the balance on that 90-day range original download. The reason why QuickBooks does that is because QuickBooks doesn't know that you're actually going to go back and enter 90 days worth of beyond the 90 days worth of transactions. So if you are going to follow the process that I just showed you, where you're going to download 90 days and then go to the bank and download the difference, I need you to go into the register and delete this opening balance transaction. Now, if you're not going to download a balance from before that, if you were not planning to download a whole year's worth of transactions like I just showed you, then you're going to leave that opening balance there because it's the only way that QuickBooks will give you a correct running balance. That's a really important point. So if you do go this route and you delete the opening balance equity transaction that QuickBooks created because of the 90-day download, you're going to have to plug in there the beginning balance up to that period that you downloaded. I'm going to click delete, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So in this particular case, I'm going to go back into banking. In this particular case, because I'm going to download, I'm going to scroll all the way down and just kind of show you that again, hit last, because I'm downloading everything all the way back to, in this case, January 1st of 2017. Then I have to enter an opening balance for December 31st, 2016. Otherwise, your bank will never reconcile. So we're going to literally grab the opening balance from our bank statement. So we literally go to our bank statement on December 31st of 2016, which is the particular date range that we're working with, and you grab that ending balance, type in that balance as an opening balance equity transaction in the register. So I'm going to go back to banks and credit cards. I'm going to click here where it says go to register, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing that QuickBooks Online did automatically when I downloaded 90 days, but now I'm going to bring in the opening balance from that day before the entire range I downloaded. So I'm going to click on deposit, 12/31/2016. The account, it's opening balance equity. And we could argue at what the exact account that this should be. For now, just use that one. It's just easier to explain. But your accountant may say, well, the account should be retained earnings. And that's okay. If your account tells you it should be retained earnings, that's fine. Use retained earnings. But it's either retained earnings or opening balance equity. I wouldn't stress out about it. Usually, accountants get to clean this up for tax season anyway. But you want to bring in that beginning balance because I'm going to reconcile a whole year's worth of transactions. Then I'm going to click on save, and good. So the only transaction I should have in my Chase account that I downloaded a whole year's worth is the one opening balance that I just manually created. Again, if I didn't do this, if I didn't manually create this transaction, then what you will have is the one that QuickBooks entered for you automatically, having to do with those first 90 days that it downloaded. I'm going to go back into banking. So now that we talked about those really basics of connecting, bringing balances, and entering an opening balance, let's talk about actually using online banking. So I'm going to give you a few tips that has to do with just being really comfortable in the screen. First thing I would recommend is to click the three lines at the top, which basically will minimize or compress that left navigation bar. That will give you a little bit more real estate. Then we're going to click on this little tiny triangle on the right side. So we're going to compress those accounts that are up there. We're going to click on this warning message. We're just going to hit X because we don't need to see that. And that automatically gives us a little bit more real estate. And then we're going to experiment with the zoom in and zoom out. So you're going to hit Control plus and Control minus. If you're on a Mac, it would be Command plus and Command minus. So you can zoom in and zoom out of the screen based on really like what font size you want to work with. If you want large font or small font. Again, we're going to enter 1,200 transactions, right? So we want to be as comfortable as possible in the screen. We want to feel like we're moving fast. So you want to use the font using Control plus and Control minus. That works best for you. Then we're going to click on the little gear button on the right side of the screen. And then we're going to scroll down to some of the options here. And we have the number of rows that we want to see. So if you want to see less rows, because too many rows is overwhelming, we're going to click on 50, and then it will only show you 50 rows at a time, which basically means that you have to click on next, next, next if you want to see more transactions, but it will load faster. So it's really up to you and how many rows you want to see at a time. We'll start with 50, then move on to more afterwards. And this little box here that says compact, we can uncheck that, and you're going to see a wider space between each transaction. Again, that's really up to you which way you like to work better. I like to work compact because I want to have as much space, as many transactions in the screen as possible, because that really helps me contextually understand kind of what's happening, what's coming, and that sort of thing. Now, something I really like is this little checkbox that says show bank details. When you look at something for a second, so for example, here the transaction says description into it. Now, what QuickBooks does is QuickBooks translates or tries to simplify the information that's coming from the bank for you to enter it in QuickBooks. The problem is that sometimes QuickBooks, in this simplification, it may miss some information in the process. The actual information that came from the bank is this whole text that you see here. Now, that may or may not be a good translation, so it's really up to you on whether or not you want to use that default option of QuickBooks kind of guessing what is the transaction that's coming in. So I prefer to actually click on this checkbox that says show bank details, and then no longer QuickBooks will translate or change the name of those transactions. I'm actually going to get the raw information that comes from the bank. Now, in some cases, QuickBooks does a good job at translating. In some cases, it does a horrible job. To me, I prefer to see the actual raw information because that's the same information that I'm seeing when I'm looking at the bank statement, for example. So then I'm going to take this transaction and then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this one Intuit Payment Solutions. You actually have to create a vendor for every single transaction or every single payee that you have. You have to create a vendor by typing up the vendor's name and clicking on add. Okay, so we're gonna verify that, verify it's a vendor, and then click on save. And then QuickBooks will now save that into the memory, and hopefully the same transaction that comes up with the same bank description, it will pick it up and classify it for you. Let's say that this goes into a category called bank charges and fees. Okay, so I'm taking the vendor name called Intuit PYMTSOLN Tran Fee, and I'm translating it to my own vendor name called Intuit PMT Solutions, and I'm categorizing it to bank and service charges. So once I click on add, you will notice that some of the transactions that contain the same payee now change to green. Now, green means QuickBooks is guessing or suggesting a category based on a previous transaction. There we go. So I found Intuit Payment Solutions because these are sorted alphabetically. Notice that all these are categorized to bank charges and fees. So all that we have to do is accept one by one. Notice I don't have to really do any more categorization at this point. I can actually just click on one in the top and then hold the shift key and go all the way down to select a whole bunch. So notice that I'm selecting all these and I'm accepting what these are. So by selecting a whole bunch and then clicking on the top, clicking on accept selected, it will actually bring in all those transactions in one shot. Now let's go look at a different example. So for example, I got this one vendor called McDonald's F7409, and notice that there's McDonald's with different names afterwards. Now what this will do is I'm going to categorize one of these. So I'm going to put here McDonald's. Click on add vendor. And then I'm going to put this under meals and entertainment, and then click on add. And you will notice that the 4 McDonald's that are left, QuickBooks was smart enough to recognize that all these are part of the same vendor, and is suggesting, okay, all 3 of these should go into meals and entertainment. So I can click on add, and add, and that's all set. Now notice the next set of transactions. I got these vendor here called Massage Envy. Now there's no vendor in QuickBooks, but QuickBooks is guessing that this is meals and entertainment. Now that could be wrong or that could be right. It really depends on the context of the transaction. But let's say these happen not to be business expenses. These are personal expenses. So I'm gonna come up here and create my vendor, click on add. And instead of making these meals and entertainment, we'll call this one shareholders distribution. If the account is not created, I'll click on add and I'll create this one as an equity account. These are personal expenses. And then I click save and close and then click on add, and I can accept this other one and click on add. So that kind of gives you an idea of how this works. Every transaction gives you the opportunity to create the vendor, select the vendor, and create the category. Now, QuickBooks is getting better and better with artificial intelligence and is starting to guess what some of these categories are and is giving you some suggestions. I'm not a huge fan of some of the suggestions that it gives you sometimes, but in some cases they are pretty good. Like notice that these Office Depot ones is office supplies and software. That's likely to be accurate. So all I have to do is click on it, create my vendor. Now always create the vendor. Trust me when I tell you this, never leave that vendor blank. Always create the vendor because QuickBooks will have much better sort of internal memory for accounts and transactions when you have those vendors set up. So I'm gonna click on add, and they basically just go down the line, right? So I haven't sorted by bank detail, which allows me to do a lot of transactions all at once. And I'll give you some really positive examples of why this bank detail sorting works really well, especially when you're working with thousands of transactions. For example, you look at this one called online transfer from checking. So this is, for example, let's say this is transfers to or from a personal bank account, and this happens quite often. So all I have to do is select one, go all the way down to the last one that has the same account, shift click, and that gives me a whole bunch of transactions, right? So, and then I click on batch actions, click on modify selected, and then under payee, I'm gonna put transfers to from personal account. Create that as a vendor, always create it as a vendor. And then I'll put here shareholder distribution, click apply, and that will categorize all those all in one shot. Look how wonderful that is. And then I click on batch actions, accept selected. So all that stuff works really well when you're doing a lot of transactions all in one shot. I'm going to resort this by date and then show you kind of like the more common sort of day-to-day work. The more common day-to-day work is really don't do a whole bunch of transactions at once. I'm showing you that because when you're working with thousands of transactions, that's a really important thing to do. But when you do transactions one at a time, or you download every single day or once a week, you're going to be basically entering one at a time. So for example, there's this check here, check 1671 for $255. Category is tax and license. This category is obviously wrong. It's a total wild guess because QuickBooks has no idea who I wrote the check to. So I would have to then select the correct category. So under payee, I'm going to say, let's say I pay a contractor. So I'm going to put here the contractor's name, click on add, create them as a vendor, click on save, and then create the category. Okay, if I don't have a category for it, I can create it, click on add, make that an expense, click on save and close, and there we go. I'll click on add, and that's it. That enters that transaction. Now, in some other cases, you're gonna start having transactions that are deposits, not expenditures. Like in this particular case, I have all these deposits. Now, deposits can go multiple ways. For example, if I have a QuickBooks invoice created, I have to actually match that deposit with the invoice. But if I don't have an invoice created and I really don't care about creating invoices, all I have to do is come in here. Maybe I can create a category here called sales. It's already there. And then click on add and then just go straight into my sales account just like that. I'll do the same thing here. Click on sales, add, and it will just do it like that cleanly. Now, in some other cases, as I mentioned before, you will have deposits that should actually match an invoice. So if that's the case, the way that will work is we would create the invoice before, or the invoice would already have existed. So let me create a quick invoice. And let's say this invoice was for Mary Smith, and I'll select a random product and service here, and this invoice is $750. I'll click save and close. So when there is in fact an invoice created beforehand, whenever you download stuff from the bank, QuickBooks is going to say, hey, wait a second, that deposit actually matches the same dollar amount as an invoice. You probably should match these two together. And then assuming that you are looking at the deposit image and that's accurate, then you would match them together. I mean, you don't have to match them. You can click on it and click on add and then change the category just the same way that we did it with the other ones. But once you do the matching process, you will basically tie the deposit with that invoice together. So I'm going to click on match. And there's huge benefits to that, because if I'm going to click on, I'm going to go back into that invoice right here for a second, because once you do it this way and you go to the invoice shows paid. And then there's actually the payments tied to it. And if I click on that payment button, you're going to go straight to the actual deposit where that payment was received and it was deposited into the bank. So you get that full workflow of invoice to payment all tying into the bank. So that's actually a really, really nice thing to do. But under that same circumstance, let's say that we don't have a perfect, invoice for the exact amount that was deposited. Maybe we have two invoices that together matches that dollar amount. So let's say, for example, that's the case. So I'm going to click on create invoice. And I'll create an invoice for the same customer, Mary Smith. And let's say this one's going to be for $400. Okay, I'll click save and close. I'll create another invoice for $275. So I'm going to go to invoice. And let's say I have an entirely different customer attached to it. So I'll pick a different customer, and then it's going to be $275. So I got two invoices that potentially together, if deposited together, it will match up that deposit. However, QuickBooks will not detect that. QuickBooks will not do the math, figuring out all your open invoices and telling you what is the potential combination of invoices that would match a deposit. So if that's the case, you actually have to match these manually. So you have to click on Find Match. Then you have to click on Show. For example, we can click on Show Open Invoices. We will pick the two invoices that match up that deposit. And let's say that in addition to that, the $400 invoice, the $275 invoice, there was also an extra $100, maybe a refund for insurance that was all bundled together and it doesn't match or doesn't add up doesn't specifically match an invoice, you can click here where it says resolve difference, click on add transaction, and then you can manually add that other transaction. So let's say this was a insurance refund. Okay, so I'm just showing you kind of the complexities that happens when you have a deposit that contains multiple checks that could have multiple invoices that add up perfectly, or maybe you have multiple invoices plus something else that doesn't have an invoice. That's a good example. So I'm going to click on save. Now, under the same theme, let me show you a different example. In some cases, people have credit card merchant accounts that don't deposit the entire original amount sold. Like, for example, let's say that this deposit for $426.62 was actually a sale for $450, and the difference was sort of a merchant fee or a transaction fee from your shopping cart or your credit card company. So if you were going to match up an invoice and then reduce the fee from that, that would be a little bit of a different process. So let me go ahead and create the invoice. Okay, and I'll create the invoice for the $450. And I click save and close. And again, somebody paid you that $450 through a website or some credit card company, whatever, and they deposit you short because the company took a fee in the process of making that deposit. So we will click on find match. We'll select the invoice, and now we're going to have a difference. We'll click on resolve difference, add transaction, and this time it would be a negative difference. So I'll put here 450 minus 426.62. That will give me a difference of 23.38, make that a negative. And then I'll put here bank charges and fees. And then I can put a memo if I want to or not. Change the payment to 450 because I'm getting paid the 450 in full, but I'm paying a commission for negative 23.38, and I'll put here commission from Shopify. You actually don't have to type commission from Shopify here. You don't actually have to type in the memo, but that's only if you want to. But it will be implied pretty much when you do that. So that's another scenario in which your bank deposit will not necessarily match the invoice one-to-one. So this, downloading from banks, it's a pretty simple process when you don't have to match it to invoices, but then it gets a little bit more complicated when there are actual invoices in the system. Let me show you a different example, which is matching a bill, an outstanding bill, with something that's in the bank. So let's say, for example, that this BW credit for $743 actually had an outstanding bill, an actual accounts payable. So I would actually have to let's assume that I had created a bill for this before. So I'm going to click on enter bill, and I'll put here Volkswagen, and let's say this was an automobile expense. Create the account real quick, and then I have my dollar amount. So let's say I already had a bill from, let's say, last month in there. I'll click on save and close. Then when I go back into my banking, same thing. QuickBooks says, look, there is already a bill in the system from the same dollar amount. Should these match together? If that's a good match, then we'll click on match, and that's it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. But if the match was wrong, you would have to click on add and make it something else. Or you will click on match and click on find other records and find maybe a different bill to match it to. Right now, I don't have any more bills in QuickBooks to do that with. So it's the only bill actually showing. But that's an example of how the QuickBooks banking can also match your current transactions that are in there. Now, another really important thing is QuickBooks Online works really well with up to 1,000 outstanding transactions. Anytime that you have more than 1,000, QuickBooks has some limitations on the sorting and the functionality in it. Once you're down to 1,000, if you're managing less than 1,000, you're going to see another functionality here called Recognize. Now, Recognize would be a filter that shows you only the transactions that QuickBooks is automatically classifying for you based on past transactions. Now, what's nice about this Recognize tab is that, look, it's 134 transactions that it recognized based on past behavior. And as I scroll down, I can scroll down real quick, just quickly look at it and go, yeah, you know what? That's right. All these categories are correct. I can just click on the select all button here under batch actions, and then click on batch actions, accept. Now, the Recognize tab also works really well for something that's called bank rules. Bank rules is when you explicitly tell QuickBooks, hey, this is how I want you to behave with specific types of transactions. Now let's go through these and let's look at something in particular. Let's say, for example, this one called Google. So let's say anytime that we see a deposit coming from Google, we're going to categorize it a very specific way. So in order to do that, we're going to click on the triangle button next to update, click on manage rules, and then we're going to click on new rule, and we're going to call this Google income. And we're going to say, look, when money's coming in from Google, so we're calling it Google income, but we're going to say it just needs to have the word Google and that's it. So when Google pays us, we're going to make this a deposit, and we're going to categorize this under Google. We're going to create a category called Google AdWords or something like that. Actually, Google AdSense revenue, right? We can create a customer, whatever name we want to call it. And then we're going to create a category called Google income. So I'm not going to put this under sales. I'm going to put it under Google income. For whatever reason, I want to categorize these differently. So I got Google income here, and I'm saying bank text contains Google, and I call this rule Google income. I'm going to click on save. Then we're going to go back to banking. And then now you're going to notice under the Recognize tab, you're going to see every single transaction that was categorized in Google income, and it actually tells you this is a rule. That means that QuickBooks did this based on a rule, and it automatically classified them for you. Now, when you got things inside of the Recognize tab, they're still there pending. They're pending for you to accept it, for you to say yes. So I actually have to click on these and click on add, and click on add if I want to, or as I explained earlier, we click on select all, batch actions, accept. So that's actually the other route that we can take. But the rules have this specific option, which you're gonna like, it's actually pretty cool, that allows you to skip the whole process of accepting the rule itself, and it will go straight into your register. So I'm gonna click here where it says rule applied Google income. So that gets you to edit the rule. And then when I scroll down, I'm gonna click on automatically add to my books and click on save. And now what will happen is this stuff will no longer be on the Recognize. This stuff was already automatically added to your books. It went straight into your register. When you click on this little tab here called In QuickBooks, you actually get the history of every single transaction that was brought in through the online banking, through the bank feeds feature. And then there's a column here that says rule, where you can actually see which of these were automatically created via a rule. The way you know this was automatically created is because it has a little plus icon in there. So that lets you know what was automatically created. If one of these are wrong, okay, let's say for example that this one actually wasn't a Google income, it was a deposit that needs to be matched with an invoice or whatever, I can manually click on undo, and I will undo that transaction. And when I click, let me go back to for your review, inside of all, I'm gonna sort this by bank detail, go down to my G's, and you notice that it's back in here. So it's actually back into the transactions list, and you can then do with it whatever you want. So that's actually an example of how you can take something that was automatically created, undo it, and put it back into your queue so you can choose whatever you want from it. Now, what's the point of you doing online banking? People get confused at this point saying, well, why am I doing all this, right? Well, when I click on go to register, you're gonna notice that all these transactions have been added into your register, which means that hopefully we'll be able to just, after everything is downloaded, we'll be able to click reconcile up here, select the ending balance of whatever period you're working with. Let's say it happens to be, I'm gonna click on reconcile account. Let's say it happens to be 100,000, whatever it happens to be, and we'll put ending balance 12/31/2017. We click on start reconciling, and then hopefully every single transaction that was from the bank will automatically be created here, and it will all automatically be checked. Close all these boxes. Automatically be checked, and at the end we should have a difference of 0. Now, reconciling after you download the bank account and match all the transactions means that all the debits and all the credits that went from the bank are in QuickBooks. And then once you do that, together with the right categorization, you should be able to then look at your profit and loss report, your balance sheet, whatever financial report you want to look at. I'm going to look at the profit and loss. And hopefully that's what the accounting was done for anyway. So you'll have all your income, all your expenses, your net income, you would have all that information in there. Let me click here on all so we can see all the stuff that we've done so far. And that's really the point. The point is that instead of going into the register and hand keying every single transaction, that once you download from the bank, together with all the options that you have, selecting one by one, matching them with the current transaction, creating a rule, selecting a whole bunch in batch. As soon as you're done under banking, you should have nothing else in there. Once this becomes basically an empty screen, that means that every single transaction that came from the bank has been downloaded. And once you reconcile, that means that everything in your books match your bank. So that whole combination of doing all that should speed up and shave you hours of work of entering all the accounting by hand. This is what accountants do. This is what we do. This is what we get paid the big bucks for, is to do all this work for our clients. If you're overwhelmed by this, contact an accountant. Call an accountant and say, hey, I need you to do this for me. But if you want to save yourself some accounting fees, you may want to try it yourself. And QuickBooks Online makes it super easy. You can do this all under a free trial. It will take you maybe a couple of hours, 4, 5, 6 hours to feel comfortable with it. But during tax season, you could essentially do 90% of the work and then let your accountant do a little bit of the difference only. So we'll see. You'll figure out how that works for you. But hopefully this tutorial gets you a really good idea of what you need to do in terms of connecting your bank and adding your transactions, matching them with existing ones, and hopefully reconciling your bank account, which there'll be a different video that goes into the reconciliation process in detail. So that's it. If you like this video, obviously hit like and watch the other videos in my channel by subscribing so you can get notifications of all the new videos that are created. Thank you very much.